Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and this week, I had an episode planned for this week that was going to come out today on a film I had seen recently, but then I remembered that Top Gun Maverick is coming out this week on the Thursday here in Australia, so I figured I might as well talk about Top Gun, because I figure this is a pretty good chance to talk about that film. So I actually had never seen Top Gun prior to this year. I watched it a few days ago, actually, 2 or 3 days ago, and actually at the time I'm recording this, I have actually seen Top Gun Maverick. I went to a VIP screening on last night, which is the Sunday. So I have seen Top Gun Maverick. I won't talk about that here because I don't think I should. I'm basically I will talk about my opinions on Top Gun Maverick in my what films I watched this month, and I'll also be covering it in the review of the year episode. But it's suffice to say, both of these films, Top Gun and Top Gun Maverick, I quite liked. Thought they were really good. But we're not talking about Top Gun Maverick. We're talking about the original Top Gun today. I've been aware of this film for years at this point. I'm very aware of it. I'm pretty familiar with a ton of lots of action type films from the 80s and 90s. And I like some of them, and some of them have aged have aged a lot because they're classic 80s action films. I think Die Hard is probably the best 80s action film ever made. Predator is really good, albeit occasionally a bit cheesy. Most of Arnold Schwarzenegger's action films are pretty cheesy and have aged a bit. But this film, Top Gun, I liked it. It definitely has a lot of 80s cheese to it, and it's definitely very much like, oh, this is a bit melodramatic for the sake of it, but I think it's Top Gun. You kind of can't, you sort of have to look at this film in a different way to other films, in that it's not it's not like it's one of the greatest films ever made or anything, but it's very much a film that is enjoyable. I had a really fun time with this film, and I did quite like it. So just sort of going to talk about some stuff on it. So I don't know if this has ever come up, but I'm a very, very big Tom Cruise fan. I think he's a fantastic actor. We talked about Collateral last year sometime, which I was very complimentary of him in that film. I really, really love Tom Cruise as an actor. I think he gives phenomenal performances in most of his films, even in these kinds of films. But he gives performances that work for the film. This is a film that you don't really need you don't necessarily need the greatest actor, but I think he very much sells it and works considerably well for this kind of role. I'm basically basing my opinion on his performance due to what kind of film this is, because this isn't a film where you need a Daniel Day-Lewis or a Leonardo DiCaprio or a Joaquin Phoenix or Christian Bale. You don't need one of those serious actors. You just need a good actor who is able to be very charming and likable and is able to do all these sorts of things. So I really liked Tom Cruise in this. I think he works really well. I just think the entire cast for this film works really well. I think this is a really good 80s film cast. I think 80s action films very much have specific, because with these sorts of films you sort of need there's sort of the archetypes of 80s action films. You need the charming, likable main character. You need the sort of sarcastic, funny sidekick. You've got the love interest. You've got got the guy who he's a bit of a dick and he's a bit of an ass to the main guy, but at the end they become friends. And you sort of, and the film's really very much sort of encapsulate. They sort of very much fall into these, not set these sort of like, I mean, stereotypes is the word I would use, but like archetypes, you know, they sort of fall into like these boxes, you know, of like they're very on a surface level, very basic characters, but Top Gun, this film, doesn't really need great characters. It just needs sort of more, you know, it just needs functional characters that work to help sell the story, and then like you like it needs good characters to help sort of sell that story, and that's it. You don't need to have the greatest actors per se. Like, you need good actors, of course. Like, every film needs good actors to be good. But this is a film where you don't need, like, great actors. You just need, you know, competent ones who are able to, you know, who are decent at acting at the very least, and are able to, you know, who work very well and able to sell stuff. You know, they need to be entertaining, they need to be funny, they need to be charming, you know, they need to, you know, in some cases they need to be, you know, kind of dicks, because that's sort of the character that they are portraying. And I think this cast works pretty well. You know, Tom Cruise, as I said, I liked him. Val Kilmer, I think, is very good as Iceman. I think Val Kilmer is very good at that whole acting thing. My favorite actor and my favorite character in the film actually was Anthony Edwards as Goose. I mean, everybody loves Goose, though. Like, he's just everyone loves Goose. You know, like, you can't not love Goose. He's one of those characters of, like, you know, like every so many films have that sort of guy, have that sort of sidekick character who's the charming, likable guy who, you know, is the best character of the film, who dies. Spoiler alert. But yeah, I you know, you very much need him. In a lot of films like this, you need sort of the snarky, quippy sort of side mate, like sort of sidekick, who is very, you know, entertaining and funny and likable and charming. And then, you know, when he dies, or she dies in some case, when they die, you are, you know, you're hit very emotionally due to, you know, your love for them as a character. And so, like, when Goose dies, I mean, I knew Goose died from an episode of Brooklyn Nine-Nine where, if you haven't seen it, basically, there's a scene where one of the characters is, he stopped using gun, because of, you know, he sort of, I guess you could say, PTSD, and he's basically he's procrastinating to not get his gun license again. So what he's doing is just telling his boss the plot of Top Gun, basically, and that's how I found out that Goose died. It was still a very emotional scene, and I think that's a very very well done scene when Goose dies. Like, you know, they're flying, and then they get sort of spun out by Iceman inadvertently, so, and then they have to eject, but Goose gets caught on the top, the sort of roof part of the plane, and he dies. And I think Tom Cruise really, it does, like, he gives a lot to that sort of scene, despite it not really being, like, despite this being a very sort of behind, like, this isn't a film that requires great emotional acting from your cast, but Tom Cruise, he really goes for it. He really sells the emotion of, you know, the loss of his best friend, which I think is a very, it's I don't know if powerful is the word, but it's very effective, I guess is the way to put it. It's very effective, you know, and it works because you feel the genuine friendship and chemistry between these characters, and it also is just, you know, it's the best character in the film dying, which is like you know, in so many other films like Scream, and, you know, like in Alien and Aliens and in all these, you know, sort of films, and Die Hard, and, well, not really Die Hard, but you know what I mean. There's all these great action films and horror films where the best character of the film is killed off, and it's always, it's like the best character is the side character, the quippy, the quippy side character who has the quippy side, the character who has the best lines, and like in Scream, the best character who dies is, he's got the best lines, he's got the knowledge of film, and you see why he's killed off, because, like, to be honest, the film probably wouldn't exist if he was still alive, but I mean, this is different. This is just sort of to sort of give Tom Cruise's character an emotional moment, and sort of and his own arc of, like, he lost his best friend, and now he doesn't have the sort of, I guess, confidence he had before because his best friend is now dead. But it's probably the best scene of the film, honestly. I think that Tom Cruise really sells it well. It was very funny though, watching him, like, a Coast Guard comes in, and he gets his friend, and he attaches him to a winch, and they just sort of lift him up, and his body just sort of hanging loosely there. Like, it was slightly comedic, which was obviously not intentional, but it just felt like, that's a bit interesting, isn't it? But besides that, it was a really solid film. Scene rather. It was a really good scene rather, and yeah, I think this film just it looked, I think the plane stuff of the planes flying around and everything is really great. I think it's very well done. It's very much, it's choreographed really well. The movements of the plane, it looks very good. Of course, I don't understand, and the characters have lots of sort of, like, in some sort of films there are characters who sort of spout mumbo jumbo and, like, sort of technical jargon, and sometimes it's very easy to sort of understand, and like some techno jargon, like some sort of technical dialogue jargon talk is very confusing, and you get confused trying to understand what they're saying, and you don't understand what is happening, and then, like, some films they sort of have that kind of talk, and they sort of talk about this stuff, and then and then you're watching and you're like, I don't understand what that was. Like, you don't, and even in where they do the thing that they said they were doing before, like Jaws 4 Jaws the Revenge rather is an example of, they're gonna do something to the shark. They're in this boat, there's the main guy and then his black friend, and they're talking about stuff, and they are trying to they're going to do this thing to the shark, but it's not very clear what they're going to be doing to the shark. So you're just sort of sitting there like, what the hell is this? Like, what are they going to be doing? And I think this film, like, if you're not familiar with planes, like, at all, and you have no knowledge of fighter jets, or you have no idea of, like, what I think this, or call signs or anything like that, I think this film works pretty well at sort of saying everything in a way that you'll understand, and explaining things and showing things very clearly. Like, the characters will say things, and then they'll do the things, and then they they show it, and it's shot very nicely. I think a great thing about 90% of 80s action films is they have, like, you see the action very clearly. Like, you see, like in fight sequences, you'd have really nice long takes of fight sequences. If there's a vehicle driving or fly, you get great shots of the movement of of it moving around. You get, in fight and punch ups and that, you see really good takes of seeing the actors actually doing it. Like, a lot of the time you see when actors get into fights, you see them doing it, like, you see the actors performing these sequences, and Tom Cruise is renowned for doing pretty much all his stunts in every single film of his, and I think this film, I guess, probably was sort of the beginning, because I don't think he'd really done anything. I mean, you could also argue Mission Impossible was the beginning. This was more of sort of just like a... You could argue Mission Impossible was the beginning to it, but this was sort of... Because sort of between this and that, you know, he did, like, I think Color of Money was the thing he did before this. And then after this, he did, like, Rain Man and stuff. And then sort of in 1996, when... Was it 97? I think it was 96 when Mission Impossible came out. I think that's when he really started focusing more on action-orientated roles. Although he did do dramatic work, you know, in Magnolia in 99 and Eyes Wide Shut also in 99. I think this is, like, the best. Like, this is sort of... I think this kind of role is sort of what we know Tom Cruise for. He's a very charming, likable presence who occasionally does some mental shit. This is a good This is I like this movie. I think there's some really good stuff. The volleyball scene is completely unnecessary. Since I'm talking about the volleyball scene is completely just not in any way necessary to this film. It just is such like it's how in the Fast and Furious films, for example, there's just you just see women in bikinis from behind for no real reason other than, hey, look, there's women in bikinis. Sorry, there's women in bikinis. Let's just look at them for a bit, and it's just kind of like, this is what it's like. I don't like that's in most 80s action films. In like 90% of them, the main character gets their shirt off. Like in pretty much every Arnold Schwarzenegger film, he is shirtless. Like he is shirtless in pretty much every film. Sylvester Stallone gets shirtless in a lot of his films. I think like Die Hard is one of the only examples where he gets shirtless for like a real reason. Even like a slightly more real reason. But even then he's also not in he's not like Bruce Willis in Die Hard isn't shredded. Like he's a fit guy because he's a cop, but he's not Arnold Schwarzenegger with biceps the size of a human head, like that. He's not mental. He's just a fit guy who, is in shape because you sort of need to be like that. And but this film just this volleyball scene is just completely pointless. It really doesn't add that much to the film. Honestly, I really was like, I knew there was a volleyball sequence in this film. It is arguably a bit gratuitous and unnecessary. I really can't think of an actual reason as to why this scene was necessary, other than the fact that the filmmakers wanted to have some shirtless men in there to try and, I guess, get a female audience, because otherwise this film wouldn't really appeal to them, because this is very much a manly film, you could argue. I don't know, it's very much not a necessary part of the film. I do think this film works on even when there's the scenes of the characters not flying around and everything. Even when the characters aren't flying around, I still think the sort of scenes between people on the ground are enjoyable and they work. I think that I would argue the sort of character dynamics between most of the characters work pretty well. I think. I mean, I've already sort of touched on this. I think performance-wise, this film is decent for what this film is. Like, this is an 80s action film. I'm not expecting great all-time Oscar-worthy performances. I am expecting good performances, and I think this film is pretty decent at portraying the relationships between these characters. I think the woman, Charlotte, and Pete Maverick's relationship is it's decent, but it's also one of the weaker parts because, let's just be honest, relationships in 90% of films are fucking trash. Like especially in things like 80s action films, just action films in general, honestly. I really don't care about relationships in 90%, in pretty much most films. Like, the only good films, the only films I like that deal with romances are typically, like, about tragic breakups and those kinds of things. I just don't care otherwise. I just think that's not interesting. I think seeing two happy people in a film anyway, in a happy relationship is boring because you don't really, like, it's not as interesting, honestly. I really don't care about what's gonna happen, you know. Like, I think, like, the only sort of film I could think of with like a, you could argue, happy relationship is Her. But if you've seen that film, you know it doesn't end well. You know, so like it's a nice, you know, sort of beautiful relationship in that film, which is then which, you know, by the end of the film, it as we all, if you've seen Her, I'm not going to spoil what happens specifically. I'm just going to say it doesn't end well for Joaquin Phoenix, and it doesn't, things don't go well. But so that's. So yeah, that's one of my. I think that's one of my. That's probably the weakest part of this film overall, is the relationship between Maverick and Charlie. Like, I just don't care. Honestly, they've got a really weird sex scene too. Like, it's a very 80s sex scene, and it's very strange. I was like, what is going on here? What is Tom Cruise do? Like, I don't know. Something about it was just like, does Tom Cruise know how to kiss women? This looks very, very weird. I don't like this at all. But I think that, you know, this is still a good movie. It just, you know, I think that's a problem with pretty much every with pretty much every just film, honestly, is the romantic subplot. Like, I think Die Hard, it's not even a romantic subplot in Die Hard, technically. It's about him upset that she, you know, changed her name, and then they get together at the end of it, you know, but, like, it's not, like, a major part of the film, per se. It's more just, like, he has to save her, obviously, because, you know, he still cares for her, but the subplot isn't about them getting together or getting back together. It's about him saving her and all those people, which is probably why Die Hard works so well and is such a great film. You know, like Die Hard is excellent. I love Die Hard, but this is still Top Gun. Sorry, Top Gun is still a good action movie. I think it still really works really well. I think, like, the sort of final third act of the film is really well choreographed. It's really well shot. I think that the sort of acting and both sort of performances from the cast in that scene anyway are all very effective. I like how I think that the third act is pretty, like, I think what a lot of action films do, especially the 80s do, is a lot of them have sort of very bland, not necessarily bland, but they really aren't that good. Like, they're all decent to sort of mediocre, and then the sort of third sort of final act of the film where it's sort of the big final action sequence and everything is fucking kicking off, you know, sort of it all sort of comes together nicely in sort of the final action sequence of the film. I think it all really works, you know, and I think that, like, you know, it's sort of a nice culmination of everything that the film had been very much leaning towards before that. You know, like Iceman and Hollywood, who Val Kilmer's character and his sort of co-pilot are, you know, they've graduated. And then, you know, the two of them and Maverick are called back to the Enterprise to deal with this sort of situation, and, you know, and and basically after that scene, like, because Maverick hasn't sort of really gone anywhere near there after Goose's death, so he doesn't want to do it because like, he just loses his confidence and loses part of himself. His skills have he's sort of lost his skill, his amazing piloting skills that we had seen throughout the rest of everything prior to Goose's death. This is very much like the lowest point for the main. It's the whole classic of like after like the second act, the character it's sort of the lowest point for the main character. And you get this in pretty much every film ever. There's the main character is, there's a big. A thing happens at the end of the second act, Maverick, he's lost Goose and he's lost all these things, he's lost his ability to fly as well, and Maverick sort of considers, like, maybe I can't do this anymore, Goose's death has really affected him poorly. Maverick, he does go to the graduation, he does graduate with everyone else, and then they're called back to the ship, the SS Layton. Well, no, not the SS Layton. That's what they're supporting. Rather, the Enterprise is the ship they return to. The SS Layton is what they are being called back to protect because it's in hostile waters. And I think this is a really well shot, choreographed, made third act. It works very, very well. And I think, it feels, it just works. I think, like, this is a positive of most. It's a thing of a lot of action films from the 80s and the 90s is that, the third acts typically are very well shot, they're very well choreographed, they're very well done, and I think this is another prime example of that. And they, the pilots, they're outnumbered, but Maverick, he doesn't want to leave. He wants to say that he wants to help Iceman because, even though Iceman inadvertently caused the death of Goose, Maverick, that's how it is, They're still brothers in arms, as it were, and they work together, and they're able to shoot them down, and they defeat the villain, they defeat the bad guys, as you do, and it's a very nice happy ending, and they really respect each other at this point, and Maverick throws Goose's dog tags in the ocean. He's sort of moved on from that, and he's been able to accept that while Goose is dead, Goose will never be forgotten, and him and Iceman, they hug, they get a picture together, they're happy. Iceman says, "You can be my wingman anytime," and it's a nice happy ending. And Maverick decides, instead of he goes back to Top Gun, and he stays as an instructor, and the film ends with him and Charlie coming back together, and sort of going off into the sunset, sort of proverbially together. So it's a nice happy ending, and I think this is a film that it's this movie's a lot of fun. I really liked it. It's certainly very, very enjoyable. It's a fun film, and it definitely is 80s. It's a very 80s film. I will admit, like, it is a massive 80s. It is a massively 80s film, but I can sort of enjoy 80s films in sort of this context, and I did quite like it, so I'm giving it a 7 out of 10. I did think that the romantic subplot was a bit meh, and it did go on a bit long. I did quite like. I also really loved the song, actually. Danger Zone. It's a really good song, actually. I really, really quite liked it, and it really helped sell. I think also sound design. Before I forget, the sound design of this film was excellent. I really, really loved the sound design of the planes, taking off of all that stuff. It was really, really good. That was like probably one of the best parts of the film, was the sound design, and as well as them flying around and everything. It was great. It was a really good film. Well, it was quite a good film. I really enjoyed it. So that is a 7 out of 10 for me. So thank you all for listening to this week's episode of the podcast. Next week will be the beginning of a two-parter on the Jurassic Park franchise. Hopefully, so that will be next week, and then the week after, and then because the Jurassic Park episodes will be tying into the release of Jurassic World Dominion, which I will discuss at some point in my review of the year. And probably what films I watched this month. But that is the next 2 weeks of episodes, and in between there you'll also get the what films I watched this month May edition. So yeah, thank you for listening to this week's episode. I hope you all enjoyed. This was a very last minute idea. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out all the previous episodes I've done. And yeah, next week, beginning of a two-parter Jurassic Park extravaganza, as it were. So yeah, check out the website. Check out all the social medias as I keep plugging them. Like the page on Facebook, follow the Instagram, message if you've got an email, send an email if you wish to. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I will see all of you guys in the next one. Goodbye.